hope you're used to these churches where people raise their hands. I said, why? Do they have questions?
Mr. Ron Luce, welcome. It's a joy to have you on the Go&TELL podcast.
This is the most important decision. It's not an emotional decision. It might affect your emotions, but it's not emotional. It's a smart decision. It's the best decision you will ever make. If you dim the lights, just tell a sad story, you play music, you can get people to cry and come forward. But we want long-term followers of Jesus. We don't want just people that moved for a moment and they kind of chant a prayer, but then they go on and live like they lived beforehand.
But you don't have to be the coolest person in the world. You don't have to be the coolest parent in the world. Is that what you're saying?
And I go, hey, Uncle, guess what? You helped me come up with this sermon. He goes, I what? Remember, he's a God hater, right?
So it's not good just to be a hearer of the word,
Right.
and not a doer of the word. We need to go out and do it. And the Great Commission is go and preach the gospel and make disciples. I mean, this is what God has commissioned. This is the number one call of all the believers. Preach the gospel, make disciples. Ron, so I have a question for you as we get started. Do you think that our world is on the edge of a global awakening, or are we further away from it than ever before?
Well, it seems there's so much fear in the world with wars and rumors of wars and governments and so forth. People are searching, and we could be on the precipice of something. It would be great if we were all prepared for what's about to happen or what's about to unfold. While the world gets nervous, we get more confident, and so we should be able to share that confidence and that joy as we go into perilous moments in world history. And it's an exciting time to be alive because we get to be alive potentially in the midst of the biggest move of God that's ever hit the world. And wouldn't that be great to be able to be a catalyst for that, to watch for the moment, jump through the window?
This is perfect. This is exactly why I wanted you here on the show for these kind of conversations, because we are not here talking about theory. We want to talk about practical reality, how people in our world right now are searching, are looking, and are saying, what is the answers? And we have it, and we want to equip people. So welcome to the Go&TELL podcast. This episode, I have one of my dear friends and a man I highly respect and look up to, Mr. Ron Luce. Welcome. It's a joy to have you on the Go&TELL podcast.
Thanks, Shawn. Great to be with you and love you and your family. And we love Switzerland as well. So
yeah, you've been to Switzerland and visited us.
With you, that's right.
It's a joy to be in your house this time instead of you at our house. But we had some fun times in Switzerland.
We did. We got to see every mountain there with our own 2 feet. We walked with you all.
Do you remember this hike we went on? We got halfway through the hike and the rain came. Remember this?
Yeah.
And we're so smart because we're from America. We decided to take a shortcut and go down because we thought
I remember, and we walked through a lot of rain.
And we realized this was a bad choice.
And it was cold.
It was like a 3-hour detour, and we were praying, God save us.
But you're in Switzerland, so who cares?
Yeah, and the cows and
outdoors.
That was so fun.
My wife loves Switzerland. It's her favorite place in the world to visit. So I told her you were coming. She's like, when are we going back?
Yeah, you guys need to come to Switzerland. It's an amazing place. But it was so fun to have you, and always fun to have you in Switzerland, of course.
Great. Well, we love you guys.
So first of all, many of you may not know Ron. You may know Ron. You may know Ron from his time at Teen Mania, the voice behind Acquire the Fires. But he is now continuing to reach a generation through his initiative, Project 13, which we'll talk about on the show. But just really quick, so people get to know you, just tell us briefly about who you are and what you've done, and just a brief background of who you are.
I got on fire for God at 15 years old because I had my parents had divorced when I was a kid, and we went to all kinds of dead, boring, dry churches my whole life. And a friend says, "Hey, why don't you come to church with me?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll go. God's cool. I'm cool. We'll get along fine." So I'm totally arrogant. I go to this church. And on the way in, he goes, "I hope you're used to these churches where people raise their hands." I said, "Why? Do they have questions?" And I had no idea what I was about to walk into. It was a spirit-filled church, and these people were all like crazy on fire for God. I'm like, what happened to these people? Did they touch a light socket or something? And pastor got up and preached. First sermon I ever heard in English. Just like regular words rather than thous and these. And like, And I'm sitting there, 15-year-old heathen. I was a party animal, thinking, why didn't anybody ever tell me this before? You know, and like just normal language, how great it is to be a follower of Jesus. So I got on fire, and anyways, a year later, went off to college just to learn how can I share with more people. We started this ministry called Teen Mania because I was young. Even when I was in college, I'm like, I'm doing youth outreach and stuff. I'm young, I'm on fire. They're young. Maybe that'll help, you know. And then, so yeah, we started Teen Mania. My wife and I are in a little car driving across the country. Let's change the world. Little car, you know, we'd show up. The crowds were awesome. 10, 20 young people at a time. We were filling up living rooms across America. You know, I'd preach there's 10,000, spit all over them, you know, and give an altar call, invite them to go on mission trips. Anyways, by God's grace, over the years, we kept reaching more young people. We started to acquire the fire. They grew over the years by God's grace with a whole team, a help of team members. We had 200 staff, and we ended up with an internship with hundreds and hundreds of youth right out of high school for a year program. And yeah, so we ended up get to be in front of millions of young people over some 30 years of ministry, doing big events. And it's just a beautiful thing because our whole thing was, you don't have to sensationalize the ministry or the gospel. You don't have to hype kids into it. You know, a lot of youth ministry is gets paints with emotionalism. You know, just getting you know. In fact, we went the other way. We went the non-emotional. Like we get ready for an altar call, we'd say with all heads up and all eyes open.
Yes.
No music playing and no one moving around. I want you to listen. This is the most important decision. It's not an emotional decision. It might affect your emotions, but it's not emotional. It's a smart decision. It's the best decision you will ever make. We wanted to so de-emotionalize the situation because, you know, if you dim the lights, you tell a sad story, you play music, you can get people to cry and come forward. But we want long-term followers of Jesus. We don't want just people that moved for a moment and they kind of chant a prayer, but then they go on and live like they lived beforehand. So yeah, so that's what we did for all these years. And now with Project 13, we're actually training churches to do their own epic events because you know what matters? Where your life was changed, like where you met Jesus, like who gave that altar call, and like where were you at? You remember that place the rest of your life. It doesn't have to be in a church, but instead of a church going to somebody else's event, you don't have to go to my event or Billy Graham's event. You could do your own event in your own church and have an epic encounter with God that those young people will never forget the rest of their life.
Ron, you're awesome. So what you're saying is so important for everyone watching because you said a few things I want them to hear again. One, yes, you did stadium events all over America. As a matter of fact, your ministry, the ministry that you and Katie started, founded, it impacted me greatly. I've told you this. I remember when you guys were in Indianapolis, you guys rented is it the RCA Dome? Is
That's
that what it
right.
was called? And how many, there were probably 50,000 students at this event.
Between 40 and 50. I'm not sure the
Yeah, who knows? There was a lot. There were tens of thousands either way. There were a lot. And I remember bringing a group of students from Iowa. I was a youth pastor in Waterloo, Iowa. Have you been to Waterloo?
I don't think I have.
Have you been to Iowa?
I have.
Okay. So they came from Waterloo, Iowa. And I remember there was this one kid who I had just poured and poured and poured into him the gospel, but he was not moving. Like, you know, that like he was one of those kids that was like put a big wall up. And we go to Indianapolis. We're sitting in the top deck. And when you did the altar call, you did exactly what you said. You know, does anybody here want Jesus? And I don't know if you remember this, but people just started standing up. I want Jesus. They would scream, I want Jesus, or something like that.
I want the cross.
I want the cross.
Yeah.
I want the cross. I want this. And all of a sudden, that kid who we had shared the gospel to countless times stood up and said, I want the cross. And I just started crying because all these seeds that were sown,
Beautiful.
finally he said, I want the cross. And so, but you were doing these all over America and even other places in the world. But you started in living rooms. You started with what you had in your hands. And I think that's important that people who are watching this could hear that God gives us these dreams that are big, right? I mean, you had this big dream to reach teenagers, but you had to be faithful where you were at first. And I want to encourage you that are watching or listening, start with what's in your hands. God's giving you big dreams and you say, how can I accomplish it? You accomplish it by being faithful with where you are at this very moment. Is that right?
That's
And
right.
you saw God just take things off to
That's right.
a level that's
right.
incredible.
Now, let me just say something about that. Those kind of altar calls. Um, we heard what I'm about to tell you, stories like this repeated again and again, where young people that had struggled in their faith, on fire, fall away, on fire, fall away, on fire, fall away. When they were given a chance to make a dramatic expression of following Jesus, like stand up and scream as loud as you can, I want the cross. It's like the chains all fell off,
Mhm.
and they didn't struggle anymore. They stayed free. And there's something about, are you secret agent Christian? Or are you like, I'm full on, I'm there, I'm a follower of Jesus, and I'm unashamed about it,
Yeah.
that those chains fall off. And so we would try to help young people be able to make a decision like that. But also, there's something to be said for the environment of faith. Now, what you just described about, I've had other youth pastors tell me that, where they did every trick in the book. They knew everything
Yeah.
they knew to try to get a kid converted or on fire for God, and they wouldn't listen. But there's something that happens in the environment of faith. Let me explain what I mean. When you go to a movie and it's so good you forgot what day it is, you come out like, what time is it? It's dark. Why is it dark? And you think it's a race car movie. You think you're in the movie. You drive your car. They call that temporary suspension of reality, where it's almost like a drug, right?
Yes.
Well, in the faith world, you come to an event, a church service, one of our events, any kind of revival, like summer camp. We call it temporary suspension of disbelief. So you come in, you go like, I don't even really believe this, but there's 500 of my peers here worshiping. Maybe it's true. And a layer of the onion gets peeled off. And then that preacher gets up to speak, and he's a little bit funny, and you go, oh, this is not going to be boring like I thought. Another layer comes off, and but you keep peeling all the layers off until you get to the gospel. So this is what we train churches to do. How do you create this environment of faith? This is what Jesus did. So he's on the side of the mountain, and he's like, hey, here's some miracles. Here's some parables. And layers are coming off. Layers are coming off. And he says, do you want to follow me? So he's creating this environment of faith. So people are in the crowd going, could he be the Messiah? Could he be? Maybe he is. Is he the chosen one? Is he the one? And so then when he presents himself as the only way to the Father, they go, oh, well, look at the miracles and everything. So part of our job, whether you're sitting next to somebody in a plane or a bus or at school or at a church and you're creating an event, is creating an environment of faith where people want to learn more.
That's good.
So we shouldn't have to shove anything down anybody's throat. We just create an environment of faith where people are like, could he be? Is he the one? Give them a little bit of hope that there's something more than whatever their dire circumstance that they're in the middle of, than dealing with that.
There's a saying, of course, it says you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But you can give him salt licks and make him very, 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 very thirsty
Yeah.
where he wants to drink.
Right.
And that's what you're talking about, just an environment. How could someone make that environment if they're a car mechanic? Or let's say they're a doctor, or they're a student at school. Like, how could they make the environment outside of a church situation?
Right.
Just
I would encourage you to start asking God for metaphors
Mhm.
about what you do and how it relates to the gospel. So, for example, one day I'm sitting on a plane and I asked the guy next to me what he goes, I'm a heart surgeon. And he's telling me all about heart surgery. And I go, oh, that's interesting. I'm a heart surgeon also. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, well, I talk about how Jesus can get into their heart and put their brokenness back together. And so like that.
Exactly.
My son and I restored a car together. We took 3 years. When he was 13, we were finished when
What
he was
kind of
16.
car
It
was
was
it?
a 67 Mustang.
Oh,
From
nice.
scratch. It was a rust bucket. And I'm sitting there under that car for hours and hours, working and greasy. And I start thinking, like, God, I got to get some eternal value out of this. I mean, obviously I'm doing this with my son. And Lord starts speaking to me like, you're restoring this car is very much like how I restore people's lives.
Mhm.
And so a million metaphors came my way. For example, I can't fix the whole thing at once, but I'm going to work on the engine, then the transmission. Just like don't get overwhelmed if you feel like there's too many parts of you that's sinful or broken or messed up. God will just take one part at a time. Your heart and your past and your emotions and
So good.
unforgiveness and 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 for example, when you get ready to paint a car, you have to take it all the way down to the bare metal. You can't just paint over the rust because it'll rust through. And too many people like to just put on a fresh coat of paint and put on lipstick and act like everything's great. Jesus wants to take it all the way down, get rid of all the rust, all the sin in your life, and then start rebuilding so he doesn't cover a bunch of rust. And in fact, this is one of the coolest stories. I got to tell you this because
I
I
wanna
know you
hear it.
guys are all about winning people to the Lord. So my uncle who's a total God hater, would always, he'd hear me preach and he'd mock me and all of this kind of stuff. And but he was a guy that restored cars. In fact, you got to see one of the cars he restored in my garage here on the way.
So beautiful.
So when I got ready to work on this car with my son, I said to my uncle, I said, would you help me or give me advice? He lived in Arizona. He said, sure. Now, anytime I talk about God, he'd like change the conversation. But when I talk about cars, he'll talk all day. So he starts giving me advice on how to restore this car. He actually came out a couple times. He saw the mechanics in our shop that really love God, big burly guys. Like, who are these guys? You know, all of that.
Yeah.
So we get done. We're about halfway through this restoring the car. And I was thinking about all these metaphors, and I thought, I have to do a sermon on this. So I did a sermon for our interns on campus, and I brought up the rust bucket, and I brought up the car that was in process, and I brought up a guy who had a car that was restored. And I asked the interns, like, what do you see? Go look, and what do you see? And I said, this is like the process. God's restoring us. And I went through the whole metaphor. Tonight, let's get back to the raw metal, get rid of all the sin or rust in our life, stuff you've been trying to put makeup on, pretend like it's not there, and let Jesus start rebuilding your life. So it was one of the most moving times we ever had. And people were up till middle of the night crying and praying. And about a week later, I'm praying about this, and the Lord speaks to me. That message wasn't for your interns. It was for your uncle.
Wow.
So I get on the phone to my uncle, and I go, hey, uncle, guess what? You helped me come up with the sermon. He goes, I what? Remember, he's a God hater, right? Because he had his mother used to beat him all the time when he was a child. He'd chain him to the bed, and he used to pray. He'd say, God, if you're real, help these beatings to stop. And they never stopped. How could there be a God?
Yeah.
So I said, you helped me come up with a sermon. He goes, what? So I gave him like the 3-minute version of what I just told you.
Yeah.
I said, you know, your life full of rust, and it's just like it's full of sin. And he goes, oh, I got it. So you showed him the rust bucket. He said, is that what you're like? So he's tracking with me on this little sermon, right? And so now from that point on, every time I talk to him, we're talking about the Lord, we're talking about cars, we're talking about the metaphor. Then all of a sudden I can't get a hold of him. 3 weeks, can't get a hold. I talk to him a couple times a week. 4 weeks, find out he's in the hospital. He found out he has leukemia. I get a hold of him in the hospital, and we start talking about cars again. And I said, and about the Lord. And I said, most important prayer you can pray is to ask God to forgive you, get rid of all the rust in your life, and give you a new heart. And he goes, I've been praying that prayer a lot lately. From that time on, that's all we talked about is the Lord. 2 months later, he's in heaven. Ron. And it was amazing how, and watch for this, if you're trying to share the gospel, God took what he was doing with his hands for 40 years and used it to get to his heart. So then I went and spoke at his funeral. His funeral was packed full of a whole bunch of heathens that, they're all sailors, Yeah. And I told them the whole story I just told you, and a bunch of them gave their life to the Lord right there. So just be watching for metaphors. They're all around you on how God wants to get to people's hearts more than we do. And that's why Jesus said, look at the lilies and look at the sparrows. And like, he's trying to use every little thing to get to people's heart and understanding of how good God is.
So true. Have you read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Yeah, I'm sure parts of it, yeah.
Yeah. One of the points that that's mentioned there is that if we want to engage with people, speak on the terms of their interest.
Right.
Like speak on what interests them.
Right.
And a lot of times when we start talking about the gospel or preparing people for discipleship, we're just using Bible metaphors, Bible scripture verses, which is important to use. But when we get on their level, like you said with the car, it just opens, they get it. It opens the door for the gospel seed to be planted. They understand.
When it goes to this point of, sometimes we think, unless we use our Christianese, someone's not really getting saved. In other words, we can't talk about a car. We have to use confess your mouth, believe in your heart, blah, blah, blah. And we use these and thous and all kinds of things. People don't understand. It's like, would you force someone to learn Chinese first before you can learn the gospel? Why would you force them to learn Christianese first? Use words that they can understand. And that's what happened when I went to that church when I was just 15, and the pastor spoke in normal words. I didn't know it was legal for pastors to use normal words, like to explain God.
Yeah, of course.
Read the Bible, explain it, And so we can use normal words and we don't have to sound all spiritual, make them learn spiritual language. I think the best analogy that I've heard about helping people how to really connect with people, winning them with the gospel, is think about each person is like a glass of water, and there's a crack in that glass, and you just keep feeling around and feeling until you find the crack. That's where the gospel fits in, because all humans are broken. So you don't have to struggle. You don't have to like, how do I just keep talking to them, and they'll tell you where they're broken, and then you can show them how Jesus puts their life back together. It's as simple
Brilliant.
as that.
So good. Wow. You know what I love about you, Ron, is since I have been following you up to now, man, your passion for Jesus has not slowed down, man. You are a man that just loves Jesus. Uh, Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. People are like, Ron Luce, man, where have you been? What are you doing now?
Well, we're helping churches reach and raise up the next generation. So all the data, both in America and around the world, shows that even though we've been reaching, we the church been reaching, we haven't been keeping.
Yeah.
And so we have to rethink our goals as church leaders and Christians. Is our goal just to get people saved, or is our goal to make lifelong followers of Christ? I would argue, of course, the second. That's why Jesus said, go and make disciples. So now we come alongside churches and teach them principles of what we learned from churches around the world that are the very best at reaching and raising up the next generation. So one of those things, one of the best practices that they have 4 best practices that we learned. I won't tell you them all, but one of them is reaching them when they're most likely to come to Christ. And that all the data says the more young you get, the more likely they are to come to Christ. So if you're measuring as an entrepreneur, ROI, return on investment, the amount of effort, energy, money that you spend on any outreach programs, why would you want to get the most bang for the buck, the most souls per dollar, the most impact for the sweat that you give? So we call it Project 13 because churches have learned that when they focus on 13-year-olds in their city, in the footprint of their church, way more likely than a 17 or 18 or 25-year-old.
Yeah.
It's hard to get to them when they're younger than 13. Vacation Bible school, that's good, but how do you follow them up? But 13, you have a little bit of freedom. You go to the movies, go to the mall, go to church. So they do a couple of events, big events, a couple times a year, and we call them epic events, and we teach them to do kind of their own acquire the fire in their church. Whether it's 50 people or 100 people or 1,000 people, doesn't matter the size. The epic event it's epic because the presence of Jesus is there, right? And so we call it Project 13 because we're trying to get churches to focus on 13-year-olds, right? And 13-year-olds, they're at this very interesting moment in their life. They're like, I'm not a child, I'm an adult. What am I? And if we're not careful, we'll let TikTok tell them what they should be. But they're desperately looking for belonging. So they're going to look for it in the coach, the ball team, or a choir, or a drug dealer, or a gang leader. And usually churches are running right by them because they're messy, they have no money, they can't drive. That's when they're open to the gospel. So the churches that we studied, they really think deeply, like how many 13-year-olds not are in our church, but are in the footprint of our church? Like how many schools are in our zip code? How many 13-year-olds are in those schools? And when we go and do an event every 6 months, imagine a harvest every 6 months. More come to Christ, and then more come to Christ, and then more come to Christ. Training churches how to do that, but I would say just as important is how to not just keep them in church. The goal is not just attendees. The goal is to make them into disciple makers. So you want them to become attendees and then disciples and then disciple makers. And so we have a thing, one of the things we learned from the churches that we studied is they really think differently about disciple making. They think like, what do we want them to look like at 21 years old? Their character, their heart for God, scriptural acuity, leadership skills, and then they reverse engineer it. So what should they learn at 13 right after they come to Christ, and then 14, and then 15, and they scope and sequence it all along the way so that by the time they're 21, they're deep in their faith, and they've been making all kinds of other disciples. So you don't have to tell them, they've been doing it. It's a transformational process so that they've been doing for a long time. That is not just transform the moment they came to Christ, but it's teaching them daily to meet with the Lord, how to interact with Scripture, how to adopt Scripture. And the churches that we studied, in order to get them from 13 to 21 years old, they all use a trimester system. 12 weeks, and then 12 weeks, and then 12 weeks, keeps going and going and going. You'd never teach somebody trigonometry before you taught them arithmetic. So why would you say, just go read the Bible somewhere? Well, they don't know where to read. They don't know where to start. Okay, it's better than nothing, but why wouldn't we be smart about how we raise them up? So we're training churches now to start the development process. They come to Christ, And one of the things we learned from the churches we started is really beautiful about all the precise steps they take. Pre-evangelism, like before the event, during the event, and after the event. Really important, every baby step. I say precise, because usually in church we think precise, we go, well, that's our lighting cues or our video cues. But what if we were precise about the souls of men? You know, people that fly planes, they're precise. Every time they take off, they have to go through a checklist. You do brain surgery, heart surgery, you have to be precise. Why wouldn't we be precise with the souls of men? So things like, because we've had this problem, we the church, we get people saved, they come to a big event, but we can't get them to come back. Well, people will come out of obligation. If you beg them and beg them and beg them, they come out of transaction. But the churches we learned from, and now we're training churches, if you start a month or two in advance and start incubating them relationally, be kind to them, be a decent person to them. You're looking for the kid that just broke up with a girlfriend or got cut from a team or somebody who's going through a divorce, and just being kind to them. You're incubating them relationally. So then when an event comes, you invite them to church. They're coming out of a relationship, not out of obligation, not out of transaction, way more likely to come back. And then once they come to Christ, what happens the first 12 hours, 72 hours, 24 hours, 72, the first week, second week? So important in terms of, it's like a refugee in a brand new country. Who they bond with is very, very important.
Yeah.
And so we learn from churches, and now we train churches on, you got to have your team of disciple makers already. And I mean, literally, they wake up the next morning after a big event, they've got all the names, all the contact information, and they're leaning in relationally. Go and have a Coke with them that first week, bringing them back. Really, really important. It's not some stranger knocking on the door, hey, I heard you, wah, 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 wah. Like, you're really getting to know them. It's not about numbers, it's about relationship. And so then when they come back, you can say, this is what we do. We follow Jesus. You decided to become a follower? That's great. But we want to help you follow him every day. And so then you introduce them to a trimester system. And let me show you some of these, because since you asked. So we have a whole series that churches are using now. Trimester 1, 2, 3, 4. We have all 24 scoped out. Here's the first 7. So trimester 1, looks like a book, but it's not. It's actually a Holy Spirit grenade that you throw in a teenager's grenade. So the series is called Pathway to Freedom. Trimester 1 is how Jesus impacts every part of my life. So they just gave their life to the Lord. It's not all about going to heaven. It's about, how do you live here on earth? So kids lonely. There's a whole week on, what do you do if you're lonely? What does the Bible have for you? Or what if you're having problems with your family? A whole week on that. What about music? And so it's not a book that you read. It's 2 or 3 pages a day. That there's interactivity. What do you think this Bible verse means? And so it's teaching them to really connect with the Lord each day. And on day 7, each week, there's a set of discussion questions that the small group goes through. So what you're trying to do is really help them have an ongoing transformational conversation, interaction with the Lord each day, with the Lord and with each other each week. So anyways, so now there's hope. And instead of saying, what do we need to do to keep them in church? That's the lowest common denominator. We want them to all become disciples and then disciple makers. So by the time they're done with the first 3, they've been a Christian a year. We're going to train them and deploy them to be a disciple maker as well. So yeah, that's what
I think we've talked about this. Every church in the world needs to implement a Project 13 in their church. How can people get a hold of the material or get to know you or get a hold of you to implement this in their church?
Well, so this is our process is, once somebody indicates interest, and you can email me at ronluce100@gmail.com. Just email me direct and we'll send you a link to everything. But the first thing we do is, once you sign up for Project 13, we do an onboarding call with you, the pastor, the youth leaders, whoever, and walk you through. And it's a monthly, like, month 1 you do this, month 2 you do this. How do you implement? Because it's really and truly a different wineskin. So we have masterclass, all kinds of videos, templates. We got booklets to help you implement things. You know, by the time the month 1 is done, you'll have a whole 12-month plan put together. And then we walk with you month by month, coaching you via Zoom all around the world. We have cohorts around the world now that, so you've learned this month, this is how you implement. You've learned month 2, you've learned this, now you implement. And we're watching churches see incredible impact. Imagine a church, they've got 200 kids in the youth group. 90% of them are in one of the first 5 trimesters. They're all learning every week. And they all come and talk about it. And they're all like in all these dozens of groups. And they're winning their friends to Christ every 6 months. They have a whole new influx because they just won a bunch more to Christ. And they start 6 new trimester 1s.
Wow.
Meanwhile, trimester 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 are all in process as well. It's beautiful.
I love it.
So now there's hope. Our goal is not please come back, here's pizza, please come back, here's burgers, like begging, begging, begging. It's just like, this is kids going, I want to grow, I want to learn, I want to bring my friends. And how refreshing is that? So
Wow.
it's a process oriented, it's not an event strategy. We leverage events, but it's a life-giving process that we help churches implement.
So we're going to put in the description, you'll be able to find Ron's email address. So you can click that, email Ron if you're a pastor, a leader in a church. Bring Project 13 to your church. If you go to a church, get his email and give it to your pastor so your pastor can call Ron. We have a lot of people are watching it and they say the show and they're saying, I really want my son, my daughter, my grandson, my granddaughter, my niece, my nephew, who are in this 13, 21-year age to come to Christ, but I have no idea where to begin, how to begin. I'm not cool enough. I'm not hip enough. They speak a language that I don't understand. They're all into whatever, and I don't get it. How could they begin the process of sowing that gospel seed and getting them on that path of discipleship? Where do they begin?
Good. Well, first of all, let me just make a comment. If there's a pastor or somebody watching, if you'd like, just hit my email and we'll give you a free strategy session online, like whether or not you use Project 13, just to help you think through some of the principles that will work no matter where you live, and we'll just bless you with that. So if you know a 13-year-old, and I would just want to encourage you, start sniffing around, because you've got a niece or a nephew, you got people live down the street from you, you got people you're related to, people you work with that have 13 or 14-year-olds, right? So first of all, they're in your vicinity. Of course, everybody needs Christ. However, why wouldn't we want to sniff around for those? Like what Paul did, he'd go in and he went to a synagogue because these people were monotheistic. They heard that there was a Messiah coming. They're most likely to be interested in a Messiah. So look for 13, 14-year-olds, whatever, and start dropping breadcrumbs. Like, Jesus is the best thing that could ever happen to their life. And first of all, you start looking for that brokenness in their life, and you show them, like the crack in the glass, where Jesus best fits into that. Now, the thing with 13-year-olds is they so desperately want to be accepted. They want to belong somewhere. And so it's like shooting fish in a barrel. If we don't go get them, then some influencer on YouTube is going to get them and brainwash them. And instead of going after kids that are 16, 17, 18, chasing kids that don't want to get caught. That's really, they're driving, they're drinking, they're fooling around, and youth pastors are, please come, 13-year-olds want to get caught. So breadcrumbs are things that will make them curious. And so you go, oh, well, when I was 13, blah, 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 and I didn't know that Jesus could have done this for me. So you can relate to them with challenges maybe that you had when you were 13. You can say, do you deal with any of those challenges, And just talk to them. Sometimes people think that the Bible is only, spiritual language for after you're in heaven. But actually, it's mostly about Jesus' answers to all of the issues that we face right now. So you don't have to go and get messed up again and again and again and again and find yourself at the bottom of a pit. He'll take you right where you are and start putting your life back together. Why wouldn't we want to go to the guy who wrote the manual? He invented life and he gave us a manual on how to live life. So Jesus, imagine, he's here for 3.5 years, all of his parables, all of his teachings. He was teaching people how life was meant to be lived, So any topic you can imagine, he addressed that. And so this is our opportunity to say, Jesus teaches us how we were meant to live without all the brokenness, without all the hurt. And if we would, the more in line we get our life with the Bible, the more freedom we have, the more healing we have. And Jesus did what we call now discipleship evangelism, where he's actually training people how to live and made them curious. And one of the churches we studied in Japan actually does this, where they train people all about Jesus' teaching before they actually ever ask them to give their life to the Lord. And because they feel like if you just pray a prayer, but you don't tell us that he wants us to live pure and he wants us to live according to scripture and things like this, that you're baiting and switching. Like you ask us to commit to something that we didn't realize we were committing to. And so our job, I've heard it said this way: when you're communicating, you can either be obligatory or enabling. Obligatory, you need to, or else. It's like you should, versus enabling is you can live this way if. And so when we're talking to them, we say, you can live free if. You can live without chains in this area if you can. The word can is an enabling word if Jesus understood what Jesus meant when he said this, or what the Bible said when it says this. And giving and empowering and encouraging, uplifting. We've all seen enough of the finger pointers. You need to, and most times that's what people think about Christianity. They feel the obligatory. But what if we're out with enabling, with an inspiring message? You can live this way. If you just would understand what Scripture meant, and what the Scripture is simply God's manual on how he meant to live life. And too many of us, we get something, we buy something, and we don't even look at the manual. Well, I can figure it out. Especially men, right? We don't want nobody telling us what to do. Well, why would we do that about life? The Bible is God's manual for how life ought to be lived. And breadcrumbs are, hey, he says this about this. He says this about, for example, friendships, or about romance, or about sex, or about whatever. God wants you to have the best sex in the world. Really? We thought he hated sex. No, he invented it.
That's good.
This is it. But every topic, it's an enabling topic. But you just got to understand how he meant for that topic. A great relationship with your kids, or with your parents, or with your work, or with whatever, and then you start giving the message on what Scripture says on how life ought to be lived, and that makes them thirsty for more.
So you don't have to be the coolest person in the world. You don't have to be the coolest parent in the world. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, that's probably the misnomer. It's like, if I'm not cool, I can't relate. If I don't have a tattoo, if I'm not Mr. Funny Guy or whatever, listen, young people can tell if you love them, if you really care for them. And pastors especially, they feel like, I'm not cool, so I'm going to hire a cool guy to be my youth pastor. Listen, pastor, they can tell if you love them. And just throw them a bone. In your sermon, you don't have to turn your whole service into a youth service, but whatever your service is, think about a 14 or a 15-year-old sitting in your congregation. How does this message apply to their life? That's all. Let them know that you're thinking about them, and they'll feel loved and cared for by you. And people can tell if you love them. Young people can tell if you love them, and help them see how the gospel relates to the challenges that they're facing right now.
Do you think we've made evangelism and discipleship just too complicated? The church in general over the years.
We've made it harder on ourselves, for sure. First of all the Christianese we use, the these and the thous, and spiritual sounding things that we sound spiritual, but a lot of times we make no sense. I'm getting ready for a big event. One time, I think it was at Detroit or something, 40,000 kids, and I got called by a secular newspaper, wanted to interview me. So we're doing this interview, and they said these words. They said, Ron, what is the message you have for these 40,000 young people coming? Now, I realize she's a secular interviewer, and she got a secular audience. So I'm trying to think of what are the words that would make sense to her, that would make sense to her readers. So I said, we're going to tell them that Jesus is the only one that has the power to change their heart. And if their heart is changed, everything else will change. So she thinks for a minute, moment of silence. She goes, is that anything like being radical for Jesus? I said, well, yeah. Is that anything like being born again? And she starts rattling off these Christian phrases. She goes, well, listen, I interview all these preachers that come to town. They keep using all these phrases that none of us know what they're talking about. Would you mind if we went through these phrases and you can define them for me? Wow. So from now on, our readers will know what you guys are talking about? And I thought, I wonder how many people actually think that but never say anything about it. So I started changing even the way I talk about the gospel. I stopped asking people to get saved because they don't know what even saved from what. I stopped asking them to get born again. I stopped asking them to become Christian. I started asking them what Jesus did. 32 times the most common way he asked people to connect to his Father was, follow me. Those two words. I started asking people to become a follower of Jesus, become a follower of Christ. This is what it means. Of course, you get born again in the process. Of course, you get a brand new heart in the process. But when you become a follower, you take the first step right now, but then we're going to help you take the next step, the next day, and the next day. So you're not having two conversations. Do you want to get saved? Okay. Do you want to be a disciple? It's all following Jesus. Yeah. Tonight, right now is the first step, but we're going to help you keep taking steps.
To use that language, being a follower of Jesus, is so powerful. I remember you were preaching a message in Zurich. I don't know if you remember this. You were preaching at a church in Zurich, and you were talking about this very thing, being a follower of Christ. So salvation, discipleship is not just repeating a prayer. It's not, just going through 4 steps and saying yes or no, check the box. Okay, now I'm a Christian. It's literally turning and being a follower. And in Switzerland, you mentioned how it wasn't just being a fan.
Right.
Fans know statistics. A follower knows all the details about
Right.
who they are. So a follower of Christ keeps you from awkward moments.
Right.
Keeps you from moments that you don't want to be part of.
And it's easy now because there's a lot of people following. I'm following this influencer. I'm
Yeah, it's
following.
great. Yes.
So we can say following Jesus is like that, but it's a lot more intense. It's not like click and I'm done. It's like following me. I'm going to learn how to live based on his teaching. I'm going to learn how to. I'm going to follow him personally every day. I'm going to follow him into heaven one day. I'm going to follow him by learning how he taught us how to live, reading the Bible. That's what a real follower does. And so you fill in the blanks on what it means to be a follower of Christ versus a follower of an influencer or of a TikToker.
So you that are watching, when you're at your work, when you're at your school, don't think that you have to use all this Christianese. Just talk to people about being a follower of Christ. And it's an amazing step to get them closer in their relationship with Christ and in discipleship. I mentioned awkward moments. You preach a lot of places. Do you have like one moment that stands out like, oh man, this was an awkward, crazy, funny story moment
I
that
got a lot of
I
them, but
could relive?
I'll tell you. I'll tell you one of them. It
Yeah.
happened early on in the ministry. I was preaching at a Christian high school, which is no fun place to preach at because they're all stuffy and they're forced to go there and all of that. So there's probably about 50 or 100 kids there. I'm preaching like there's 1,000, I'm 10,000. I'm preaching and preaching, and I'm asking at the end. I go to this altar call, and I go, "How many want to get radical for God? How many want to stand up and believe about mine?" And like everybody just sat there. I'm like, "Come on!" I do it again. So they just sat there, and there's no music, there's nothing. And finally, I got this holy anger inside me, and so I pointed at the kid, and I go, "What about you? Don't you want to be on fire for God? Don't you want to be radical for?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Why didn't you stand up?" He stood up. I go to the next guy. "What about you? Don't you want to be on fire?" Da, 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 da. "Yeah." "Why didn't you stand up?" He stands up. I get to about the 5th or 6th kid, and "What about you?" And he goes, "I think it's stupid." I said, "Really?" I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I think it's a crock." I said, and so I stopped. God gave me the right words. I said, "You see what's going on here? You guys," because he's the cool guy in the room, "you're letting his attitude affect all of your decisions. It's time for you guys to be bigger than one influencer and become influenced by Christ." And they all stood up and let that guy kept sitting by himself. And this is a big problem that we have in general, is that we care more about what other people, the cool guy in the room, thinks of us rather than what Jesus thinks of us. And so anyways, there you go.
You, when you were doing Acquire the Fires, and then of course what you're doing now is just as significant, if not more actually. Was there some things you said on stage then that you would be like, oh man, I wish I could just reword this? And
Oh yeah, yeah, and some things I can't repeat again, but I've had repeated to me like, oh wow. So I got a lot more precise with my wording of every little, even announcements, really, very, really precise.
I was preaching one time in Switzerland recently, and I said something, and the whole message, I couldn't even focus on my message because I was thinking, oh man, what did I just say? I probably just offended somebody. And yeah, anyways, what do you think the biggest challenge in the church is at this moment? And not just, I don't mean just the church as far as like going to a church building, but like all of us who follow Christ, who are in the marketplace, in our schools. Like, what's the biggest challenge for us, or one of the biggest challenges?
I will tell you, I believe it's a grand challenge of our moment. Like every church, every season of church has faced a grand challenge. There was the bubonic plague, and that was the grand challenge. And the church rose up and went back into the cities that had bubonic plague. And they're known for nursing people back to health, sometimes losing their own life. After World War II, General MacArthur said, we need 1,000 missionaries. It was our grand challenge. And 1,500 went into Japan to get them when they were most vulnerable. Our grand challenge right now, all the data says, all the trends show by 2050, some say by 2060, Islam will be the biggest religion on earth. So it's growing not by conversions, but by forced, they're taking over nations and things like we're seeing that all around the world. And when history books are written, they will be written about what did we know about this? Did we do anything about we, the church? And part of the reason that's happening is the church globally is getting older and older and older. That means we're not reaching and discipling the young generation. So the good news is we can change the trend, okay? But changing the trend, that is, start monitoring the average age of the attendees of your church every 6 months? Is it getting older or younger? Most churches are getting older because they don't monitor it, right? And by reaching 13-year-old senior and discipling them, you're going to start getting your church younger and younger. Now, we still have enough runway on this. We can change this trend, but either we're going to live in a moment where they write about us and they say, oh my gosh, we went into 1,000 years of the dark ages. What happened? Was the church doing? Or they're going to say, we almost went off a cliff, but the church rose up and look what happened, and revival happened. We need about 1 million churches of the 5 million around the world, about 1 million to start focusing on young people. It's not an option. It's not like still tolerate a pretty good youth group. Pretty good is not enough. Pretty good is losing more of each generation. So that's our grand challenge. Will we rise up? The good news is we don't have to invent it ourselves. We've learned from churches around the world. Just do what they're doing. They're lowering their average age by reaching the younger and discipling the younger generation.
This is our moment in history. This is our time in history. And the gospel, the baton has been passed down to us, and we really ride on the shoulders of past generations of believers. The heritage of the Christian faith is amazing.
That's right.
Men and women who laid their lives down so that we can be where we are today.
That's right.
And it's not a time to be lazy. It's not a time to be lethargic. It's not a time to say, oh, look how great we are. We can have mega churches and we can do this. Look at us. We're so smart and we're so good. That's not the time we're in. The time is, as you said, for all of us believers to grab onto this thing and preach the gospel and make disciples of all nations.
That's right. And I will tell you that it's a question of strategy. Everybody has a vision. We want to reach souls. We want to reach souls. And people say to me, well, Ron, we just need a Jesus movement. Well, we had one of those. The problem is, for every one Chuck Smith, there are probably 1,000 pastors that didn't know what to do with those kids, and they became Jesus junkies, and they started cults. So we don't just need a Jesus movement. We need a Jesus movement, but we need to be able to disciple those. And saying, well, we just want to reach souls. Well, what? It's a matter of how.
Yeah.
It's a strategy question. And so Project 13 is a strategy. It's a whole strategy play for the future of your church. It's how to reach them and engage them and make them into multipliers. And so not every strategy is a good strategy. You can say, well, I want to get to New York. We can go through Miami. You can go through Budapest. You can go a lot of ways that take you a lot longer, or you could go the shortest way. And so why wouldn't we want to learn from other churches that are doing really well and then customize them, personalize them for our church, for our culture? We know it works all around the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America. We learned all over the world, and then apply it. Come on, let's get on our game. This is our moment.
Yeah.
The world's going after them. Drug dealers are going after them. TikTokers are going after them. Why wouldn't we go after them when they're most likely to come to Christ?
Yeah, I say all the time to my staff and my team, right now, as we're talking, right now in Silicon Valley, there's a group of brilliant MIT grads who are thinking about adding one more pixel into the iPhone. How do we put one more pixel in that iPhone? And I've heard you actually teach us that there's a verse that Jesus said, the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their kind than the people of the light.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, we need to be shrewd. We need to be wise. We need to be passionate.
Yeah.
We need to be equipped.
Yeah.
And then we need to go do it.
Yeah.
So it's not good just to be a hearer of the word.
Right.
And not a doer of the word. We need to go out and do it. And the Great Commission is go and preach the gospel and make disciples. I mean, this is what God has commissioned. This is the number one call of all the believers: preach the gospel, make disciples.
That's right.
And that's what we are doing this podcast for. That's why we have you on the show, Ron, because we want you to be equipped and encouraged. We're not superstars in the kingdom. So there are no superstars. Jesus is the superstar.
Amen.
There's one king, there's one crown, and that king is Jesus. The crown's on his head. We're just believers. We just love Jesus. We are followers of Christ, just like you. And what we're trying to help you understand is God can use you just like he uses us.
Amen.
And here are some tools that you can use. Here are some resources you can use. Ultimately, go and do what God's called you to do. But man, if you're struggling in your walk with Christ as far as how to get the gospel out, here's some techniques, here's some tools that we're giving. If you're saying, how do I disciple young people? Ron, you are loaded with tools. You've been doing this for I was gonna say centuries, not centuries. You've been doing it for decades, preaching the gospel and making disciples, and really a general in the faith for the past many, many years. And so get a hold of these tools and use them, implement them, and watch how God will use you just like he uses any of us and actually, he doesn't use us. He wants to partner with you. He wants to work alongside you. He wants you to go on this journey with him because Jesus can save the world all by himself. For whatever reason, he decides he wants to do it with people. He wants to do it with you. He wants you to go and share the gospel and make disciples of your friends at school, of your coworkers at work. Some of you, you're wondering, why do I sit next to this crazy person at work? All they do is just gossip, talk about everybody. They're heathens, they're drunkards, they're crazy. They go to bad places on the weekends. Why in the world am I even at this company? I'll tell you why you're there, because you're a missionary by Jesus, sent to bring the gospel and make that person a follower, a disciple of Jesus Christ. And so, Ron, anything else? I have one more question for you before we go, but is there anything that's just burning on your heart that you want to say?
Well, I know that there's a lot of pastors that feel stuck, churches that feel stuck. And in fact, we get a lot of inquiries online of people wanting to, and we ask what is your biggest challenge? And they'll say, we have no strategy. And it breaks my heart so much. Like, here's the Great Commission, but we have no strategy to implement it, kind of a thing. And so I'm thanking God for the strategy we've learned from around the world, but also, pastors, I want you to imagine walking into your church 6 months from now and seeing dozens of small groups of kids on the ground with books open, Bibles open, talking about what the Lord's been speaking to them all week long. I'm telling you, I've seen it with my own eyes, and now churches are learning it. Imagine they're not just getting spiritual food when they come and hear you on Sundays, but on Wednesdays, but every day. You could never expect somebody to only breathe once a week or survive on one meal a week. Why would we expect them to survive spiritually on one meal a week? And so really teaching them discipleship is not like, oh no, it's a big Rubik's Cube. How do we solve it? It's solved. We've learned it from churches, and now you can implement it. Our time is done. We don't want people barely hanging on to Jesus after they get out of high school or college. We want them deep in their faith, multiplying their faith. So there's no reason to not do it. Now we know how.
Yeah, Ron, I wish we could just go for hours and hours and hours. We're going to have to do this again sometime very soon. But for the person who's listening that says, man, I'm just holding back from sharing the gospel and making disciples, what would be your last charge to them?
Think about what is the best thing Jesus has ever done for you? What your life was like before and after. Like, what's the thing that you're most grateful that he did inside you? Because that's all you have to communicate. Share that with somebody, and because as you're sharing it, it will come alive. Listen, even if you don't feel good at sharing the gospel, because really what's happened is a miracle's happened on the inside of you. How do you describe a miracle, right? So even if you don't feel good at describing it, just try. Because as you try to describe the miracle, and then give my heart to him, they understand that what happened inside you is a supernatural thing. It's intangible. And just trying to describe it conveys something that there's a vacuum inside them and something that they need, that you have.
I love it, Ron. Thank you. This is not just another podcast. This is a reminder. You don't need a stage. You don't need a microphone. You don't need a platform. You just need to go and tell the good news of Jesus. So this week, don't just listen, but actually do it. Go and tell. See you next time.